Welcome, everybody, and thank you for celebrating Deaf History Month with us. My name is Alina Rodriguez, and I'm the Family Engagement and Community Outreach Coordinator for Toledo Public Schools.
My name is Nicole Shetterly. I'm the Family Engagement Coordinator for the preschool program.
And our special guest today is Mrs. Jennifer Mirelez. She is the ASL teacher at Waite High School.
All right, thank you, ladies. First, I want to introduce the students that are part of the workshop today. I have my ASL 4 student, Denasia Stewart. We have ASL 3 student, Savannah Downbrough. And also ASL 2 student, Jordan Richardson. ASL 1 students, Kayla Tidball. Go ahead and think about your name, Kayla. Haley Kieber. And Alex Castro. And they are all in my ASL classes, so I really appreciate that they came together to be part of this today. My sign name, Mirelez, Mrs. Mirelez. So I was given the sign name the first day that I walked into TPS as an interpreter, and as an interpreter I was Miss Jen, so it was a J because of my long curly hair. And then as a teacher, it was changed to an M for Mrs. Mirelez. The sign name can only be given by given by a deaf person or hard of hearing person. So not even me as an ASL teacher, as no hearing person can do that. And it's usually based on how someone looks or acts. Sometimes if they smile a lot, it might be here, or if they have glasses, it might be something up here. And it would be the first letter of their first name. So that is where Mrs. Mirelez comes from. The first thing we're going to do, Denasia, ASL 4 student, she is going to do an ABC story. And what an ABC story is, it's a form of ASL performance arts where you tell a story and you use the hand shapes of the ASL finger-spelled alphabet in sequence order. So you go from A all the way to Z, and you use the hand shapes to tell a story. And this is a big part of deaf culture. Deaf people love watching these kind of stories. And I usually do this in my 3 and 4 class at least once or twice a year, that the kids come up with their own ABC stories. And then the end of the story ends with the general handshake for Z. So Denasia is going to show you one talking about a morning routine. So go ahead, take it away. And there is the Z. So yay. So this is deaf applause. In deaf culture, we applaud this way instead of this way. So next, the students have some statements they're going to say. Think, and as you hear them, think about if you think they are true or false. And then I will tell you afterward what they are. So Alex has the first one.
ASL is universal.
Haley,
All deaf people use ASL.
Kayla,
People live in a silent world.
Asia,
Sign language is always encouraged in the classrooms.
Jordan,
Having a deaf child is a tragedy.
and Savannah.
All deaf people want to be fixed.
Very good. And actually the answer to all of these are false. So I'm going to talk about some important dates in Deaf history. We just finished Deaf History Month. It began on March 13th and ended on April 15th. And those two dates are very important in deaf culture because you may think, why does it start in the middle of March and end in the middle of April? So those two dates are important. Before I do that though, the first one, ASL is not universal. It's used in America, American Sign Language, and some parts of Canada. But other countries, whatever they have their own signed language. French Sign Language, South African Sign Language, Mexican Sign Language. Not all deaf people use sign language. Some of them are oral, and so they choose to use lip reading and speech instead. Deaf people love music. They don't live in a silent world. They love to like feel the music and like turn it up really loud. If they have a little bit of hearing, they can like to turn it up and dance and move to music, just like hearing people. A time, which we'll talk about that, where they forbid ASL in the classroom. And not all deaf people want to be cured. They've always been deaf, and they have deaf family, and they're part of deaf culture, and so they're just fine being deaf. They don't want the cochlear implant. They use sign language, and they don't necessarily want to be cured. So the first date, I'm going to start with the last date that was just last week that Deaf History Month concluded, and that was April 15th. This date dates back to the 1800s. So there's always been deaf people, you know, it's the beginning of time in sign languages. But how American Sign Language got its start was because of two men. One whose name was Dr. Thomas Gallaudet. He was hearing, he was American, and the other guy, his name is Laurent Clerc, and he was deaf. He was a Frenchman. And Gallaudet, he was a minister. He was hearing. He had a neighbor. Her name was Alice Cogswell, and she was deaf. And she is credited with being Gallaudet's inspiration for wanting to learn how to teach deaf people. And he could tell that she was really smart, but like she didn't have any education. He wanted to know how to teach her to learn and to read and write, but he didn't know how to do that. Didn't know how to educate her. There was no deaf schools at this point. So this is in 1817, so over 200 years ago. And he knew that Europe had a history of deaf education. And so he decided he was going to go there and he was going to learn the best methods to teach deaf children and bring it back over here to the United States and set up a deaf school so he could teach deaf kids. And while he was over there, that's where he met Clerc. He went to France, where Clerc was teaching deaf children, himself being deaf. And he was apparently one of the best teachers at the institute where he was teaching. Gallaudet went in, observed him, watched him, and said, will you please come back to America with me and set up a deaf school, help me set up a deaf school. And Clerc was kind of reluctant, and he said, all right, I'll come so his first agreement was I'll come for 3 years. And, but then he ended up staying after that, so he must have enjoyed it. And the two of them set up the school in Hartford, Connecticut. That's where Gallaudet was from. And it was the first public school for the deaf. It was called the American School for the Deaf. And so April 15th is when that school first opened, and that's what makes that date significant. It's still in operation today. And the reason too, you might think like, what other sign language, what other country sign language is most similar to American Sign Language? You might think like Britain, because they also speak English, but it's actually FSL, French Sign Language, because of Laurent Clerc. As the kids started coming to that first school for the deaf and they started standardizing ASL, they took some signs from FSL, they took some of the signs, the home signs that the kids were using regionally and in their own homes, and then other signs that they added. And that's where ASL started to become standardized. So ASL is most closely related to FSL because of Laurent Clerc. But like I said, it's still in operation over 200 years later. There's still deaf kids, deaf and hard of hearing kids that go to that school. Then we have, so I'm going to back up a little bit into the month. So the middle of the month of Deaf History Month, we have an important date, which is April 8th, 1864. This is important. This is when the first and only liberal arts university for the deaf in the world was founded by Dr. Gallaudet, his youngest child, whose name was Edward Minor Gallaudet. He was in education. He became the superintendent because it started out as a elementary ages. And so this is when Gallaudet was founded. So and to back up a little bit, in 1856, the Postmaster General, his name was Amos Kendall, he found there were several deaf and blind students who were not being taken care of and weren't getting the education that they deserved. So he went to the courts, he had them declare the kids his wards, and he donated 2 acres of land to establish a school and housing for these kids. And then he brought in Edward Gallaudet as the superintendent, knowing he was already in education, and his father is one of the founding fathers per se of ASL. And it started out as a grammar school. It had 14 deaf children and 7 blind children. And then eventually they started offering college level classes. And then they petitioned to Congress, and Congress authorized the institution to start handing out college degrees in 1864. And this was very important because now, for the first time, deaf and hard of hearing people could go there and get higher education and get college degrees just like hearing people. And it was actually a charter signed by President Lincoln, who was the president at the time. And so April 8th is known as Charter Day, and that's when he signed that charter and founded Gallaudet. So that's the founding day. It is located in Washington, D.C. Their mascot is the bison, the buffalo or bison. They admit now, it used to be 5%, they've upped it a little bit. Now they admit 8% hearing students into Gallaudet. And the rest are all deaf or hard of hearing. And if you are hearing and you apply to go to Gallaudet, you have to go through like an interview process, and you have to prove that your signing skills are advanced enough to be able to learn and be a part of Gallaudet, because everything is in ASL. Like you have to know you have to know ASL to go there. So they admit 8% hearing students and 92% deaf and hard of hearing. Total, they have around 1,500 students, and it's grown to the original 2 acres that was Amos Kendall founded it on. to 99 acres of land that the college sits on today. It went through various name changes. Eventually it was Gallaudet College and now it's Gallaudet University. So that was April 8th, 1864. So that falls in the middle of Deaf History Month. And that's an important date. Gallaudet being the only university for the deaf, actually not even in the United States, in the world. There is another one, NITD, National Technical Institute for the Deaf. RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, competed against 8 other schools for NTID to be part of their university. So that's why NTD is part of RID. And that's located in Rochester, New York. The Gallaudet being standalone university, liberal arts university for the deaf. And they have over 50 programs you can major in. You can get a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate, all there at Gallaudet. Their earliest date, so the beginning of Deaf History Month, is March 13th. So this is significant because of something that happened in 1988 at Gallaudet University. It's called Deaf President Now Movement, or DPN. So what had happened since the beginning of Gallaudet back to 1864, they'd always had hearing presidents of the university. And so the president who's hired, they stay until they resign or they're fired or they retire. And so the previous president had I think he retired. And so everyone at the university was really, really excited because finally they were going to get a deaf president. They had narrowed it down to 3 people. 2 of them were deaf and 1 was hearing. They were all equally qualified. And so they thought, everyone was okay. They're gonna pick one of the deaf ones. They had told them what they wanted. They said, the students, the staff, everyone had said, we want a deaf president. So they all thought they know what we want. They're gonna pick one of the deaf ones. And on March 6th, the board announced that they had picked that one hearing one. Her name was Elizabeth Zinser. And so she didn't know any ASL. She didn't know anything about deaf culture. And here she is, whereas the other 2 did, being deaf themselves. And so the students were very upset, rightly so. And so they locked down the school. They put buses in front of the gates. They deflated the tires so that nobody could get in and out. They were holding rallies all the time. They were blocking the entrances. They were shouting, "Deaf President Now, Deaf President Now," and Zinser out. That was that hearing one. They wanted her out. The students were involved. The staff was involved. Other people, deaf and hearing from outside the school and other deaf schools, were coming down and supporting them. People were donating food and supplies to the cause. They marched to the Capitol and did rallies. They had support from people like George Bush, Bob Dole, Jesse Jackson, all came out and supported. It got media attention nationally and internationally. And 4 students kind of emerged as leaders, and they were very organized, and they put together 4 demands that they wanted. The first one, they wanted Zinser out. And they wanted a deaf president to be chosen in her place. They wanted Spielman out. She was the president of the board. So they wanted her out and a deaf person replaced in her position. They wanted a deaf majority, or 51%, at least 51% of deaf people on the board. So it would actually be deaf people making decisions for the deaf university and have the majority. And then the last one was to make sure that there was no punishments, like any students getting kicked out of the university for their involvement in the protest or employees losing their jobs or anything by being part of the protest. And one of the two deaf people, his name was King Jordan. He met with the students. They all said, we're not going to concede. King Jordan supported the students and what they were trying to do. And so finally, on March 11th, Zinsser did resign. And there was a march to the Capitol, and they were celebrating, and there were speeches given, even by one of the congressmen. And finally, on March 13th, their final demand was met, and Dr. King Jordan was hired as the first president of Gallaudet. So that's why that day is significant. So Deaf History Month starts on March 13th, when he was picked as that first deaf president. To start out the Deaf History Month. He was a dean at the school. He worked for Gallaudet University. He had learned ASL a little bit later on, later as a late teen in his early 20s. When he learned ASL, he was in a car accident and became deaf because of that. So he wasn't like big D deaf, like true, like ASL from birth or came from a deaf family, but he was at least deaf. He worked for the school. He understood deaf people and deaf culture. He had the famous line, deaf people can do anything a hearing person can except hear. So all the students through this protest, they kind of proved that deaf people can do anything a hearing person can except hear, and that they would get to make decisions for Gallaudet. Now, deaf people, like I said, many live successful lives. They have good jobs. They love music. They love to communicate with hearing people. No matter if you only know just a little bit of sign language, they love to communicate with you and teach you some signs, no matter what level of ASL you're at. And we have some pictures. So we're gonna, Alina, right? Alina has pictures. So I'm gonna show you some pictures of some of these men that I was talking about. So the one, Gallaudet in the left there, Dr. Thomas Gallaudet. The one in the middle, who's the hearing American. The one in the middle, Laurent Cleur, the deaf Frenchman. And then the one all the way on the side, that was Thomas Gallaudet's son, who was part of establishing Gallaudet University. Edward Minor Gallaudet. And the next one. These are some pictures of Gallaudet University. You can see that one building is quite old compared to a newer building in the right there. And the statue of Thomas Gallaudet, one of the founding fathers of ASL. And the next one. For those of you who like sports, there's their football field. The colors are blue and gold. The Bisons and the sign at the front of campus. Go ahead. Oh yeah. And then there's some pictures of the protest at Gallaudet in 1988, one of their rallies at the Capitol, their big sign, "We still have a dream," and their deaf president now, like their slogan that they were signing and saying. And it kind of, you know, this protest was kind of piggybacked off of the civil rights movement that started a few years later from that, but emphasizing, you know, we still have a dream, that we don't need to be taken care of. Deaf people are just as successful as hearing people. So that was important. So thank you. So the other thing, so classes here at Waite. TPS offers ASL classes. It's for foreign language credit. They've had an ASL program and an ASL teacher here at Waite for over 20 years. I've been here since my 6th year, I think, teaching. We do levels ASL 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it makes Waite really special because we're the only TPS high school to offer ASL as a foreign language credit. So that's always really cool. We learn about the language and grammar, but also about deaf culture and deaf history, some of the things I've talked about today. I was able to, last year before COVID stuff hit, take my students for the first time on a field trip to Wild Swan Theater in Ypsilanti. We watched a shadow interpreted play, and we took a tour of the foreign language department at the University of Michigan. So it's kind of cool being able to do that with my students. And what shadow interpreted play means is most of the time when a deaf person goes to a play or a musical, the interpreter stands, if there's one or two, they'll stand on either side of the stage. And they'll be dressed in black, like our interpreter Tom today. And they will interpret what the characters are saying. Whereas in a shadow interpreted play, the interpreters move with the characters, and they're usually dressed in whatever time period costume the actors are dressed in. And it's much easier for deaf people to watch because then they don't have to keep looking back and forth to the interpreter and what's happening on the stage. They can just watch it. And it's a really cool thing, even as a hearing person, to watch, even if you don't know that much sign language. It's a really cool thing to watch. Let's see. So, and I also do ASL Club. I do t-shirts. So this is our one from last year that we did at the beginning of the school year. So I usually pick officers, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, historian, sergeant of arms. We usually meet on Tuesdays. We play games. We have parties. We plan events. We usually sign the national anthem for assemblies here at Waite, and for the homecoming game. We usually walk in the homecoming parade as well. So fingers crossed for next year to get to be able to do that stuff again. We have parties for like Halloween, Valentine's Day, end of the year. We do a fundraiser. I'm doing a fundraiser right now with Little Caesars to raise money for our club. A cool thing last year that we did, but right before COVID hit, we signed with Perrysburg High School and Ottawa Hills High School ASL clubs at Deaf Night at the Walleye game. So that was cool to be able to come together with other ASL clubs in the area and get the kids together and do that together. And then last year also, we were able to perform at the Lighting of the Tree event downtown. Well, not last year, 2019, before COVID, downtown. And we did that with Perrysburg and Ottawa Hills, and we signed some Christmas songs with them and did that. So that was also really cool. And then we usually perform at the Follies here at Waite, and we'll do a song, which is the last thing we're going to do for you guys today. We're going to perform a song. So this is something we would, again, hopefully, fingers crossed for next year, that we will pick a song. We'll be able to do this next spring. And the kids learn it. We perform it on stage in ASL. So I really love Waite and love being able to teach students about deaf culture and ASL every day here at Waite. So it's great. Students are gonna do verses, and most of us are gonna do the chorus together. All right. So Savannah's first. Is that good, please, Savannah?
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. Hot air balloon, never go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy I'm alone. If you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy I'm alone. If you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy I'm alone.
Good job, guys. Oh, let me shut that off. Then we're gonna do. Let's start another. So our TPS slogan, TPS Proud here. So sounds good. So everybody together. And I love you, man. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Very nice job. Thank you, everybody. That was beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the students, Tom, Jennifer, you did a great job.
Thank you. Yes, and Tom, the interpreter.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So we all just leave.